Be me, Stephen. My life is pretty simple, and I like it that way. I'm the head brewer at a small, independent craft brewery. It's a good gig. The pay is decent, the work is satisfying, and I get to spend my days making something people actually enjoy. The place is called Iron and Hops Brewery. It's one of those spots that's more about the quality of the beer than about having 100 TVs playing sports. We have a solid base of regulars, people who appreciate a good IPA or a complex stout. The air always smells like malt and hops, a sweet earthy scent that I've come to associate with peace. My job involves a lot of science, a lot of cleaning, and a little bit of artistry. I manage the whole process, from sourcing the grains to monitoring the fermentation tanks. It's a quiet, focused kind of work. For the most part, I'm left alone with my tanks and my recipes. The brewery has a small tap room attached, which is where we sell most of our product. And that's where Nicole comes in. When I started, Nicole had been the taproom manager for about a year. Our dynamic was perfect from the get-go. She was a professional, knew her stuff, managed the bar staff well, and was brilliant with the customers. She handled all the front-of-house things, social media, event planning, inventory for the bar. My world was the back, the actual brewery. Her world was the front, the tap room. We were two sides of the same coin, and it worked seamlessly. We had a great professional friendship. We'd meet up a couple of times a week to sync up. I'd tell her what new batches were coming up, and she'd give me feedback from the customers. She had a good palate. She could pick out subtle notes in a beer and describe them in a way that was perfect for the menu. I remember one of our best collaborations, maybe a year or so into my time there. I'd been working on a new recipe for a dark, heavy porter. It was rich with notes of coffee and chocolate, really robust. I was proud of it, and I brought her a sample straight from the conditioning tank. She took a sip, closed her eyes for a moment, and then just nailed the description. Talked about the mouthfeel, the subtle smokiness on the finish. She was the one who came up with the name for it. We were brainstorming, throwing ideas around. I had a bunch of boring technical names. She just sort of laughed and suggested we call it something old-fashioned and strong. Her idea was Patriarch's Porter. It sounded classic, solid, like it had been around for 100 years. I loved it. The owner loved it. It became one of our best-selling beers, especially in the colder months. That's the kind of relationship we had. Easy, creative, mutually respectful. We weren't best friends who hung out after work all the time, but we were a solid team. The brewery was running like a well-oiled machine. And then things started to change. It didn't happen overnight. It was a slow creep, something you barely notice until it's right on top of you. It all started after her breakup. She'd been with her boyfriend for a few years, I think. I didn't know him well, had only seen him a couple of times when he'd stopped by the brewery. One day, she came into work, and I could tell something was wrong. She was quiet, her usual energy was gone, her eyes were puffy. Later that day, she mentioned in passing that they had broken up. I did the normal colleague thing, said I was sorry to hear that, asked if she was doing okay, the usual stuff. I'm not a therapist. I figured she had friends and family to lean on. My role was just to be a decent coworker. I gave her space. We all did. The bar staff was great, picking up any slack without complaint. For a week or two, she was just sad. Functioning, but clearly hurting. That's normal. But then, the sadness started to morph into something else. Anger. At first, it was just general frustration. She'd make bitter comments about relationships. Then, it started getting more specific. She was spending a lot more time on her phone during quiet periods at the bar. I'd walk through the tap room and see her scrolling, a deep scowl on her face. The shift in her language was the first major red flag. It was subtle at first. She started using words and phrases I'd only ever seen online. One afternoon, a regular, an older guy named Mike, who was a huge beer nerd, was talking to her about a new double IPA we had on tap. He was just being his usual enthusiastic self, going on about the hop profile. After he left, Nicole came back to the office where I was doing paperwork, looking furious. She complained that he had been mansplaining the beer to her. I was confused. Mike wasn't being condescending. He was just excited and sharing his hobby. He talked like that to everyone, including me. I tried to just brush it off, telling her that's just how Mike is. He's just passionate about beer. Her response was that I didn't get it because I was a man. That was the first time she drew that line in the sand between us. It was a weird, uncomfortable moment. I just dropped it and went back to my paperwork. But it was the start of a pattern. Suddenly, everything was viewed through this new, strange lens. Every interaction between a man and a woman in the tap room was a potential case study for her. A guy trying to buy a girl a drink was predatory. A group of guys laughing loudly at the bar were taking up too much space and creating a hostile environment. She started talking about toxic masculinity all the time. According to her, it was everywhere, in everything. In the way a male customer ordered his beer, in the jokes the barbacks told each other. It was exhausting. I tried to engage with her at first, to be a good friend and listener. I thought maybe it was just a phase, a way of processing her anger over the breakup. I'd try to offer a different perspective. I'd point out that maybe the guy laughing was just having a good time with his friends after a long week of work. Maybe the customer who she thought was objectifying her was just trying to be friendly and make small talk. But it was like talking to a brick wall. Every counterpoint I made was dismissed. My opinions were invalid because of my male privilege. I was told I was part of the problem because I couldn't see the systemic oppression she was talking about. Our weekly sync-up meetings, which used to be productive and fun, turned into lectures. I'd try to talk about grain shipments, and she'd somehow steer the conversation to the patriarchy. It was getting impossible to actually work with her. I realized that arguing was pointless. It was like trying to argue with someone about their religion. There was no logic or reason that could get through. She wasn't looking for a discussion. She was looking for a convert. And when she couldn't get that, she was looking for a fight. So I made a conscious decision. I stopped engaging. I decided I wasn't going to be her sparring partner. I wasn't going to be her sounding board for these theories. My job was to brew beer. Her job was to manage the tap room. That's where our interactions would begin and end. I adopted a new strategy. I would be polite, professional, and completely neutral. When she would start on one of her rants, I would just give a non-committal nod. I'd wait for her to pause for breath, and then I would immediately change the subject back to a work-related topic. It was a bit awkward at first, but it was better than the alternative. For instance, she'd come in saying she was up all night reading about how craft beer culture was a hotbed of misogyny. My response would be a simple, Anyway, did that shipment of keg collars arrive yet? She'd try to tell me about a microaggression she experienced at the grocery store. I'd listen with a blank face and then ask her if she'd finalized the staff schedule for the upcoming holiday weekend. I was treating her ideology like a weird hobby she had, like collecting stamps or something. Interesting for her, but completely irrelevant to me and our work. This did not go over well. My refusal to argue seemed to frustrate her more than active disagreement. She was looking for a reaction. She wanted me to get angry, to defend myself, to engage with her on her terms. By refusing to do so, I was denying her the validation she craved. I was taking away her power. Her opinions, which had become the central pillar of her new identity, were being met with total indifference, and it was driving her crazy. The big turning point, where I knew this was an irreversible path, was the Patriarch's Porter incident. It happened during a marketing meeting with me, her, and the brewery's owner. We were planning our seasonal releases for the fall. Naturally, the Porter was on the list. It was our biggest autumn hit. Nicole cleared her throat and announced she had a proposal. She launched into a prepared speech. The speech was about how the name Patriarch's Porter was problematic. She claimed it was exclusionary, that it promoted harmful gender stereotypes, and that it made a portion of our customer base feel unsafe. She argued that by keeping the name, we were making a political statement, that we were aligned with oppressive systems. The owner, a guy in his 50s who just wanted to sell beer, looked completely bewildered. I just sat there, my face a mask of neutrality. I had seen this coming. She finished her speech and proposed a list of alternative names. I remember one of them was the Collective Brew, and another was Equality Stout. They were awful, generic names that had zero personality. There was a long, awkward silence after she finished. The owner looked at me. I think he was hoping I would handle it. I didn't engage with her premise at all. I didn't argue about whether the name was offensive or not. I just pulled up the sales figures on my laptop and turned the screen towards them. I pointed to the line item for Patriarch's Porter. I explained that it was our number 2 seller year-round and our number 1 from October to March. I stated that changing the name of a successful, established product would be a terrible business decision. It would confuse customers and kill the momentum we had built. I presented it as a simple, cold, hard fact of business. My argument had no emotion in it. Nicole looked stunned. She tried to argue back, saying that ethics should come before profits. The owner, seeing his way out, sided with my logic. He said my point about the sales figures was a good one, and that the name would stay. The decision was made. The meeting moved on. But the look on Nicole's face was something I'll never forget. It was a mixture of fury and shock. She wasn't just mad that she had lost the argument. She was shattered that her entire moral framework, her whole passionate crusade, had been defeated by a spreadsheet. Her deeply felt opinions had been rendered completely irrelevant by a few numbers. After that meeting, things got much, much worse. Her attempts to educate me became more frequent and more desperate. She started sending me long, rambling messages at all hours, walls of text about something she saw on the news or an article she read. Each message was a test, a new attempt to get me to engage. I stuck to my strategy. My replies were brutally concise. To a 10-paragraph essay on toxic masculinity, I would reply with "okay." To a link to some rage bait article, I would just send a thumbs-up emoji. Sometimes I would just like her message and not reply at all. At work, her frustration was palpable. She would try to corner me when I was in the middle of a delicate part of the brewing process, a time when I needed to concentrate. She'd stand there and talk at me, and I would just continue my work, nodding occasionally to signal that I could hear a sound in my vicinity, but not really listening. I was treating her voice like background noise, like the hum of the cooling fans, or the bubbling of an airlock. It was a form of communication I learned is sometimes called the gray rock method. You make yourself as boring and unresponsive as a gray rock. People who thrive on drama and emotional reactions eventually get bored and go somewhere else to find their supply. But Nicole didn't get bored. She got angrier. It was like she was a fire, and my indifference was a vacuum, sucking all the oxygen away. The fire wasn't going out. It was just becoming a frantic, desperate search for fuel. Her work started to suffer. She got into petty arguments with the bar staff. She would mismanage the inventory, then blame it on one of the barbacks being incompetent in a way she framed as being related to his gender. Customer complaints started trickling in for the first time in years. People felt the atmosphere in the tap room had become tense and unwelcoming. I documented everything, every late text, every customer complaint, every work-related error. I kept it in a private file, not to be malicious, but for self-preservation. I had a feeling this was all heading towards a very ugly conclusion, and I wanted to be prepared. The final confrontation before the real end happened on a Tuesday afternoon. The brewery was quiet. I was in the back hosing down the mash tun, one of the most physically demanding parts of the job. Nicole came storming into the brewery area. She had her phone in her hand. She started yelling at me about how I needed to listen to her. She claimed that my silence was a form of aggression. She told me that by ignoring her, I was creating an unsafe work environment for her, that my refusal to engage with her valid concerns was a perfect example of male emotional suppression and toxic masculinity. It was the most direct, personal attack she had ever launched. I stopped what I was doing. I put down the heavy hose. I turned to face her. I was covered in sweat and spent grain. I just looked at her. I didn't say a word. I let her entire tirade hang in the air between us. She stood there, breathing heavily, waiting for my response, waiting for the explosion. I held her gaze for a few seconds. Then, I calmly said, "Nicole, I have to finish cleaning this. It has to be sterile for the next batch." I turned my back on her, picked up the hose, and went back to work. I could feel her standing there behind me for what felt like an eternity. The only sound was the high-pressure spray of the water against the stainless steel. Then I heard her let out a sound, a choked gasp of pure rage and frustration. She spun around and stormed out of the brewery, slamming the door behind her. I knew, right then and there, that I had broken something. I had shown her in the clearest way possible that her emotional outbursts, her accusations, her entire belief system, had absolutely no power over me. It was less important to me than cleaning a tank. I knew she wouldn't be able to let that go. A final confrontation was now inevitable. I just didn't know it would come so soon. The days following that confrontation in the brewery were incredibly tense. It was a cold war. Nicole was at work physically, but her spirit, the friendly and professional one I used to know, was gone. In its place was this resentful, silent presence. She did her job, but only the bare minimum. There was no more chatter, no more collaboration. If she had to speak to me, her words were clipped, her tone was ice. The rest of the staff felt it too. The tap room, once a lively and fun place to work, was now blanketed in this thick, uncomfortable tension. Everyone was walking on eggshells around her. I saw her during her downtime, sitting at the end of the bar, scribbling furiously in a little black notebook she now carried everywhere. She would write for pages and pages, her expression a mix of intense focus and simmering anger. I didn't know what she was writing, but I had a pretty good guess it wasn't a collection of poetry. It felt like I was watching someone assemble a bomb. I just kept my head down. I focused on my work. I brewed, I cleaned, I managed my inventory, and I stayed in my part of the building. I was just waiting for the inevitable. The whole situation was unsustainable. The explosion came that Friday. Friday nights were always our busiest. The place would be packed by 7 p.m. It was a great scene. The air would be buzzing with conversation and laughter, the clinking of glasses, good music playing over the speakers. It was the culmination of my work. Seeing people happy, enjoying the beer I'd spent all week making. On this particular Friday, the energy was especially good. The weather was perfect, and we had a popular food truck parked outside. The tap room was a sea of people. Every table was full, every stool at the bar was taken. I was out front for a bit, which was rare for me on a busy night, but I was talking with one of our main hop suppliers, who had stopped in for a beer. We were standing near the end of the bar, talking shop, enjoying the atmosphere. It felt normal. For a few minutes, I almost forgot about the storm brewing under the surface. That's when I saw her. Nicole was making her way through the crowd, heading directly towards me. Her face was unnervingly calm. It was a forced, rigid composure that looked completely out of place in the lively room. She was holding a single sheet of paper. She walked right up to me and my supplier. She didn't even acknowledge him. She just stood there silently, waiting for me to finish my sentence. My supplier, sensing the sudden shift in mood, quickly made his excuses and disappeared into the crowd. Now it was just the two of us, standing in the middle of a loud, happy bar. She held out the piece of paper to me. Her voice, when she spoke, was low and steady, but it vibrated with a strange intensity. She informed me that she had drafted a new taproom code of conduct. She said it was necessary to ensure the safety and comfort of all patrons and staff, particularly women. She told me she wanted me to review it and approve it for immediate implementation. I took the paper from her. My heart was pounding, but I kept my face neutral. I knew this was it. This was the moment everything had been leading up to. I turned slightly away from her so I could read it in the dim light of the bar. The document was titled, "A Manifesto for a Safer Space." It was a list of about 10 rules. A few of them were just over the top, like a rule that all beer names had to be vetted by a committee for potentially problematic language. But a couple of them were truly unbelievable. One rule stated that bar staff would be empowered to remove any male patron who was perceived to be staring at a female patron for an inappropriate length of time. It didn't define inappropriate. It was completely subjective. But the real centerpiece, the grand finale of her new world order, was the last rule on the list. It read, "To foster an environment free from unsolicited advances, any man who is in the establishment alone is not permitted to take a seat at the bar directly next to a woman who is also alone. He must leave at least one empty seat between them, unless he is explicitly given verbal consent to sit closer." I had to read that one twice to make sure I was understanding it correctly. It was a policy of literal segregation. It was insulting, it was unenforceable, and it was commercial suicide. I pictured our bartenders trying to explain this rule to a 60-year-old regular who just wanted to sit at his favorite spot at the bar after work. I imagined the reviews we'd get online, the reputation we'd build. I finished reading and folded the paper calmly. I looked up at her. She was watching me, her eyes burning with a self-righteous fire. She was expecting a fight. She was ready for it. She had her arguments prepared. I didn't give her one. I took a slow breath and kept my voice low and even, so only she could hear me over the din of the crowd. I said, "Nicole, thank you for putting this together, but we won't be implementing any of these rules." Her calm facade started to crack. A flicker of confusion in her eyes. She asked why not, her voice a little sharper now. I told her the rules were impractical and would create a negative experience for our customers. I specifically addressed the last rule. I said, "We are not going to start policing where our paying customers can and cannot sit based on their gender. It's a completely unreasonable and offensive policy." That's when the dam broke. Her composure didn't just crack, it shattered into a million pieces. Her voice suddenly shot up in volume. "Offensive? You think that's offensive?" A few people at the bar nearby turned to look at us. What's offensive is that you, as a man, have no idea what it's like. You have no idea how threatening it is to have some random man sit next to you. Now more people were looking. The conversations around us were starting to falter. I tried to de-escalate. I told her this was neither the time nor the place for this discussion. But she was beyond reason. She was in full crusade mode. "No, this is the perfect place. You don't care about safety. You only care about making men feel comfortable." Her voice was getting louder, more shrill. The music seemed to fade into the background. "You're a part of the problem, Stephen. Your silence, your indifference. It's the same thing that allows toxic masculinity to thrive. You are actively contributing to an unsafe environment." The bar was getting quiet now. Dozens of people were staring at us. She was pointing her finger at my chest. Her whole body was shaking with rage. She was putting on a performance, and I was cast as the villain. All my work, all the effort I'd put into building this place was being threatened by this public spectacle. I looked at her, and I didn't see my former colleague anymore. I saw a stranger, someone who was willing to burn everything to the ground just to prove a point that only existed in her own head. And I felt nothing. The anger and frustration I'd been suppressing for months were just gone. In their place was a cold, clear certainty. I knew exactly what I had to do. I waited for her to take a breath in the middle of her tirade. In that brief pause, I spoke. My voice wasn't loud, but it was clear and sharp. It cut through the tension in the room. "Nicole, you are creating a scene and disturbing our customers." I kept my eyes locked on hers. "You are behaving in a completely unprofessional manner. This is a workplace, and your conduct is unacceptable." She opened her mouth to scream another accusation, but I kept speaking. "We are done here. Your employment is terminated, effective immediately." The silence in the bar was now absolute. The look on her face was something I will never forget. It was a wave of pure, unadulterated shock. Her jaw hung open. Her eyes were wide with disbelief. All the righteous fury drained out of her, leaving behind a confused, stunned woman. She had come looking for a battle of ideas. She was prepared for an argument, for a shouting match, for a moral victory. She was not prepared for a simple, irreversible consequence. She wasn't defeated by a counter-argument. She was defeated by a business decision. She started to stammer, trying to say something, but the words wouldn't come out. I turned to one of our security guards, who had already started moving towards us. I asked him to please escort her out of the building. As he gently took her arm, she finally found her voice again. It wasn't a shout anymore. It was a weak, pathetic protest. But it was too late. The show was over. The security guard led her away through the silent, staring crowd. I stood there for a moment, in the dead center of the quiet room. Then, I turned to the bar staff, who were all looking at me, wide-eyed. I gave them a slight nod and said, "Let's get back to work." Someone turned the music back up. Slowly, hesitantly, the buzz of conversation started to return. The incident was over. The next few weeks were about cleanup. The owner backed my decision completely, especially after I showed him my file of documented issues and a copy of her manifesto. We had to hire a new taproom manager, of course. We found a woman in her 40s who had been in the industry for 20 years. She was professional, no nonsense, and incredibly good at her job. The change in the atmosphere was immediate. The tension was gone. The staff was relaxed and happy again. The customers noticed it. Business got even better. I never saw Nicole again. I heard from a former bartender that she had posted a long, rambling story about it on social media, painting herself as a martyr who was fired for speaking truth to power. A few of her online friends were outraged for a day or two, and then the world moved on. Sometimes, when I'm in the brewery late at night, surrounded by the quiet hum of the equipment, I think about it all. I don't feel anger or resentment. Mostly, I just feel a sense of profound relief. I didn't win an argument. I just removed a problem. I realize that you can't reason with someone whose entire identity is built on their sense of grievance. You can't win a game where the rules are constantly being rewritten to ensure you lose. The only winning move is not to play. Just turn your back and go back to doing your job. And my job is to make beer. And the beer is good.